this special event tonight. The Dharmabum Temple is a place for study and practice of Buddhism. We have no teachers or gurus at our talks. Every class is free and peer-led. Tonight we have a very special guest, Thanissaro Bhikkhu. Thanissaro Bhikkhu, sorry, Bhikkhu. Also known as Ajaan Geoff. He is the abbot of Metta Forest Monastery in Valley Center, along with a growing number of monks trained in the Theravada tradition, specifically the Thai forest tradition, although it's not growing anymore, right? Tan Geoff has translated numerous passages of the Pali Canon. He has also written a number of books, all offered for free at the monastery. The thing I like about Tan Geoff is although he practiced for years in a Buddhist country in Thailand, he really knows the pitfalls of being an American. He is a great person to ask anything from questions about suttas, meditation advice, or just practical advice to help ease stress and suffering. Thanks so much for being with us tonight, Tana John. I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, fine. I'd like to start by meditating as a group for a while. So, close your eyes. And think thoughts of goodwill. Goodwill is a wish for true happiness. Because true happiness comes from within, your true happiness doesn't have to conflict with anyone else's. So when you wish goodwill for everyone, there should be no conflict. And when you wish goodwill for yourself, it's not a selfish thought. So start with that thought. May I be truly happy? May I understand the causes for true happiness and be willing and able to act on them? And then extend the same thought to other people. Start with people who are close to your heart, your family, your very close friends. May they find true happiness too. Then spread that thought out in ever-widening circles. People you know well and like. To people you like, even though you don't know them so well. To people you're more neutral about. And to people you don't like. Remember that the world would be a much better place if everyone could develop the skills required for finding true happiness inside. Spread thoughts of goodwill to people you don't even know. And not just people, living beings of all kinds. East, west, north, south. Above and below, out to infinity. May we all find true happiness in our hearts. Now bring your attention to the breath. Take a couple of good, long, deep in and out breaths. Notice where you feel the breathing process in the body. That's what we're going to focus on. Not so much the air coming in and out through the nose, but the movement of the body that brings the air in and lets it go out. If you found a spot where it's really prominent, ask yourself, is it comfortable there? If long breathing is comfortable, keep it up. If it's not, you can change. You try shorter breathing, like in short, out long, out short. Deeper, more shallow, heavier, lighter, faster, slower. Experiment for a while to see what rhythm and texture of breathing feels best for the body right now. Your mind wanders off, just drop whatever the thought was and you'll be back at the breath. The wanders 10 times, 100 times, bring it back 10 times, 100 times. Each time you come back, reward yourself with a breath that feels especially good, gratifying deep down inside. And of course, why stop with one breath? This way the mind will be more and more inclined to want to come back. If there are any pains in the body, don't focus there. Focus on the parts of the body that you can make comfortable with the breathing. Now, as the breath gets comfortable, there is a tendency sometimes to leave the breath, go with a sense of comfort, which would destroy the foundation of your concentration. So the next step is to try to be aware of the whole body as you breathe in, the whole body as you breathe out, to counteract that tendency. And a good way to build up to that whole body awareness is to first go through the body section by section to see how the breathing process feels in different parts of the body. So start down around the navel. Locate that part of the body in your awareness and watch it for a while as you breathe in, breathe out to see what rhythm and texture of breathing feels good there. If you notice any tension or tightness in that part of the body, allow it to relax so that no new tension builds up as you breathe in and you don't hold on to any tension as you breathe out. Move your attention up to the solar plexus, the area right in front of the stomach. And follow the same 3 steps there. In other words, 1, locate that part of the body in your awareness. 2, watch it for a while as you breathe in, breathe out to see what rhythm of breathing feels good there. And then 3, if there's any tension or tightness in that part of the body, allow it to relax. And move your attention up to the middle of the chest and follow the same 3 steps there. And bring your attention up to the base of the throat and follow the same steps there. Bring your attention in the middle of the head. As you breathe in, think of the breath energy coming in not only through the nose, but also through the eyes and the ears. And from the back of the head down from the top of the head, going deep into the brain. And as you breathe out, think of radiating up from the head in all directions, working through any patterns of tension you may feel around the eyes, in the forehead, in the jaws, back in the neck. And gradually dissolving those patterns of tension away. And bring your attention to the back of the neck, right at the base of the skull. As you breathe in, think of the breath energy entering there from the back. And then going down through the neck, the shoulders, the arms, down to the tips of the fingers. And then as you breathe out, think of it radiating out from all those parts of the body into the air. And as you get more sensitive to these parts of the body, you notice that you're holding more tension in one side than the other. Allow that side to relax. And then see if you can keep it relaxed all the way through the in breath, all the way through the out. Now keeping your attention at the back of the neck as you breathe in, think of the breath energy entering there, now going down both sides of the spine, down to the tailbone. And as you breathe out, think of it radiating out from the entire back into the air. Here again, if you notice that you're holding more tension in one side of the back than the other, allow that side to relax. Bring things into alignment and balance. And see if you can keep it relaxed as you breathe in, as you breathe out. And move your attention down at the base of the spine. As you breathe in, think of the breath energy entering there and then going down through the hips, the legs, past the ankles and the toes, down past the ankles and feet down to the toes. As you breathe out, think of it radiating out from all those parts of the body into the air. Here again, if you notice that there's more tension in one leg than the other, allow that side to relax. See if you can keep it relaxed all the way through the in-breath, all the way through the out. And that completes one cycle in the survey of the body. If you were meditating on your own, you can go through the body as many times as you like, at whatever pace you like. For the time being, choose any one spot in the body where it seems most congenial to focus your attention. Center it there. And then from that spot, think of it spreading out to fill the entire body. So you're aware of the whole body as you breathe in, the whole body as you breathe out, connecting all the parts of the body that you've been focusing on. The range of your awareness may have a tendency to shrink, especially on the out breath. So remind yourself each time you breathe in, whole body. Each time you breathe out, whole body. Allow the breath to find whatever rhythm feels best. Your only responsibility right now is to maintain that sense of centered but broad awareness. There's nowhere else you have to go right now. Nothing else you have to think about, nothing else you have to do. Allow your awareness to rest right here. Before you leave meditation, think thoughts of goodwill once more. Think what a sense of peace or well-being you felt in the past session. Dedicate it to others, either specific people you know are suffering right now, or all living beings in all directions, what the Thais call our companions in birth, aging, illness, and death. May we all find peace and well-being in our hearts. If you'd like, you can continue meditating during the talk. Otherwise, you can open your eyes. We hear so much about how the Buddha taught about equanimity, keeping the mind on an even keel, accepting things, not getting upset. And also about the principle of impermanence, how things change. And sometimes it sounds like he's leaving us unprotected in case of negative change. We simply roll over and accept whatever's coming up. That's not the case. As he said, there's skillful equanimity and unskillful equanimity. And it's important to know the difference. And to think about skillful equanimity, it's good to remember that the Buddha himself was a member of what was called the noble warrior caste. He's recommending the equanimity of a warrior. In other words, you have your mind set on victory. You're not going to just roll over and let the other side defeat you. You realize, though, that in the course of going for victory, there are going to be hardships, there are going to be setbacks. You can't let yourself get upset by them. Otherwise, you become your own worst enemy. So the equanimity he's talking about is the equanimity that can face change, negative change. Not be affected by it, keeping in mind the original determination, that you're going to go for victory. Of course, for him, victory means victory within the mind. Because you're trying to overcome your own greed, aversion, and delusion, because you realize that the way you live your life, the things you do, say, think, the intentions you act on, are going to be the main factor that influences your life and affect other people as well. So you want to be able to do them skillfully. You don't want your random emotions, your vagrant emotions to come in and get in the way of what you know is really the best thing to do. So the Buddha says you've got to have this sort of equanimity, the endurance, calm the mind in a way that allows you to see where you have to accept a setback and where you don't. And also what kind of changes you have to watch out for. He says basically there are two kinds of changes you have to be aware of. One is the fact that the mind itself is so changeable. Sometimes we hear it said that he said the mind is basically good, but he never said that. He never said it's basically bad. It's basically changing, changeable. It says it's so changeable that it can reverse directions so fast that there's no adequate image to compare it to. You see the twinkling of an eye, the flash of an eye is still too slow. You can change the direction so fast. That's one of the changes you have to watch out for. This is one of the reasons why he has you develop mindfulness. Mindfulness is a quality of mind where you keep something in mind. And you want to watch out for how your mind might change. You've got it set in a good direction, all of a sudden it's going to go in another direction. You've got to be mindful to hold it in. Keep it going in its original trajectory. The other kind of change he says you have to watch out for is the kind of change where You're trying to base your happiness on something that's changeable, something you can't rely on. So you have to look into that. Why are you choosing that as your focus for your happiness? Especially now with the pandemic and social unrest. We should have learned the lesson that a lot of things outside that we thought were stable and solid are not so stable after all. And if our happiness depends on them, we're setting ourselves up for a fall. So you have to look into the things that we're basing our happiness on and ask ourselves, are these things opening us up to disappointment? And also, are they opening us up to the possibility that we might start acting in unskillful ways? This is probably the biggest thing to be afraid of, is that things can get bad. And the things that we've cherished as a source for happiness are exposed to change. And we can start acting in unskillful ways around that. And then we end up with the bad karma, the bad choices that we've made out of desperation. So we have to look for a way to base our happiness inside, even though the mind at the moment is still very changeable. We can change it. We can develop it. We can train it. So if it's going to change, it'll change in a good direction. And if it's in a good direction, it's going to stay. So that's the kind of change that you have to use discernment around to see where it is wise to base your hopes for happiness. So you have two qualities, mindfulness and discernment. These are your protectors. And the kind of protection they offer can be illustrated by some of the similes that the Buddha uses in the canon. With mindfulness, one of the similes is of a man whose head is on fire. When your head is on fire, the first thing you've got to remember is I got to get the fire out. Even though I have a 5 o'clock meeting or other things I got to prepare for, I got to get the fire out first. So basically in that case, mindfulness reminds you of what your priorities are. In this case, you've got to watch out for unskillful states in your mind. Things that could take over and change your life in the wrong direction very quickly. So you've got to put them out. You don't just sit and watch the flames and see what color they are. Appreciate the color and the heat. You've got to get them out. That's the first kind of protection that mindfulness provides. And it reminds you of your priorities, that the state of your mind is going to be the basis for your actions, and your actions are going to shape your life. So you've really got to take care of the state of your mind. Anything unskillful comes in, you've got to get it out as quickly as you can. Now, this means, of course, understanding it. You can't just snuff out certain thoughts, but you have to understand how they come into the mind. This is where it's useful, one, to think of the mind as a committee. You've got lots of members of the committee, corresponding to all the desires you had in the past, and you've collected them up over the years. You've got to learn how to train the skillful members of the committee to be able to take power. The second thing it's good to keep in mind is that the Buddha said we shape our experience by some process he calls fabrication. There are 3 kinds. There's bodily fabrication, that's the way you breathe. There's verbal fabrication, that's the way you talk to yourself. In technical terms, it's called directed thought and evaluation. And then there's mental fabrication, which are your perceptions and feelings. Perceptions are the labels you apply to things. Your feelings are feeling tones of pleasure, pain, neither pleasure nor pain. And all of our emotions, or all of the thoughts that drive us, are composed of these 3 things. Anger comes and you're going to breathe in a certain way that aggravates the anger. You're going to be talking to yourself in a way that aggravates the anger. You're going to be holding perceptions in mind that the person who did whatever was wrong is a monster. When you focus on the lack of comfort in your body, there's an agitation inside. You've got to get it out of your system. But you can also learn how to unfabricate emotions like that when you realize it's not basically what you really feel or who you really are. It's simply what your habitual reaction is. And you have to ask yourself, is this habitual reaction really skillful? And there are times when being angry helps you see a problem, but it's not going to help you solve the problem. You've got to learn how to put it aside. Breathe in a way that's more comfortable, that's more soothing. Talk to yourself in a way that reminds yourself, I can't act on this. I've got to hold myself back. One of the contemplations the Buddha has is that you remind yourself, if you act on your anger, you tend to do things that are pretty stupid. And the people you don't like are going to be really pleased that you did something stupid. Do you want to please those people? It's not the most skillful thought. It's not universal metta for everybody. It's kind of spiteful, but if you can use it to overcome your anger, you use what you got. Because you realize you can't let your state of mind, if it's an unskillful state of mind, control what you're going to be doing. And then you learn how to think of things, think about the issue in a new way. As the breath is calmer, as you hold different perceptions in mind about what's possible. So mindfulness reminds you, these are the things you can do. And it's important that you give top priority to cleaning out your mind. That's one of the ways in which it protects you. Another way in which it protects you is to give you a sense that certain things are out of bounds. If you let your mind wander into thoughts and attitudes that are wrong, they're going to start having an influence on the way you act. So you've got to learn how to get them straightened out. The Buddha gives several images here. One of my favorites is the story of a quail and a hawk. The quail ordinarily would stay in a field plowed, newly plowed with stones turned up. But one day it wanders away from the field. And a hawk swoops down, catches the quail, and carries it off. The quail starts to lament, oh, my lack of merit. If only I'd stayed in my ancestral territory, this hawk would have been no match for me. Well, the hawk is a little bit peeved by this upstart quail. And so he says, well, where is your ancestral territory? And the quail says, in the field, newly plowed, with stones turned up. So the hawk lets him go. It's okay, go back to your field, but you won't escape me. So the quail goes down, stands on a stone, starts taunting the hawk, and then, come get me, you hawk, come get me, you hawk. And so the hawk swoops down, and just as it's about to catch the quail, it's coming at full speed, the quail hides behind the stone. The hawk shatters its breast on the stone and dies. And the Buddha says, the field there stands for the establishing of mindfulness, either with the body or feelings or mind in and of themselves. And getting away from the field is when we start wandering around in sensual passions. And the hawk stands for your defilements. If you're wandering around in beautiful, sight, sound, smells, taste, tactile sensations, saying this is nice, that's nice, your defilements can get you. Whereas if you're really mindful, just stay with the body and notice what's coming up in the mind in terms of what's skillful and what's not skillful. You've got yourself protected. Another image the Buddha gives that makes the same point is of a gatekeeper. He's at the gate of a fortress. The fortress is at the frontier of a country. And the gatekeeper has to be very careful to know who to let in, who not to let in, who's a friend, who's a foe. Because otherwise the fortress will be overrun by spies. Now notice, he has to be very active. Sometimes we hear about mindfulness just being accepting of whatever comes by, but a gatekeeper can't do that. You can't just note, okay, there's a spy, and let the spy come in. You've got to keep him out. It's like mannequin policemen. The places where they're cutting back on the taxes, we can't have enough to have a policeman in a car. So you put a mannequin in the car, dress it up like a policeman. And the first time you drive past it, you probably will slow down. But once you look inside, so that's not a real person, that's a mannequin. Then from that point on, it has no power. So your mindfulness can't just sit there and watch things coming in and going out. It has to decide who to let in, who not to let in, and stop the people who that are going to be unskillful. That's another way in which mindfulness protects you. It reminds you that you got to keep your thoughts in bounds. And then the final way is it reminds you, if you're really going to learn anything about the practice, you've got to be really observant, especially observant about your actions, about what the results are. The analogy the Buddha gives here is of a cook. You've got a cook working for a prince. And sometimes the prince will praise what the cook has done, and sometimes he won't say anything at all. But in either case, the cook has to notice, what is the prince like? What does he reach for? What does he eat mostly? And then make more of that. The same way, when you're meditating, you have to observe your mind. What does the mind like? Where does it like to stay focused? What kind of breathing is most congenial? Or if the breath is not a congenial topic, what kind of topic is congenial to get the mind to settle down? And you provide more of that. So you've got to be observant. This is where mindfulness moves into discernment. Noticing that you've got to use your own discernment to notice what's actually skillful, what's actually useful for the mind, what's not. And where it's good to place your hope for happiness. As I said earlier, if you place your hopes for happiness on things outside, as we've seen, can be very, very changeable. And then you get threatened. What can I do to protect this? And oftentimes we can do some very unskillful things to protect us. So we've got to look inside. What can we develop inside that we can take as a good, solid foundation for our happiness? That's the basic message of discernment. And if you find that you're depending on things inside that are not really skillful, you've got to figure out how to get past them. The Buddha gives 5 steps. Say that anger arises. You have to watch it. When it arises, what sparks it? What triggers it? And then does it last? If it doesn't last, it will stop. And when it stopped, what happened? What changed? You can't hold on to anger 24 hours without a change. It's going to come and it's going to go. What happens when it goes, though, is that we still have the physical symptoms of anger. Our hormones have turned up. And we think, gee, I must still be angry. So we dig it up again. And part of us doesn't like to dig it up, but another part of us does. And that's the part that the Buddha calls the allure. You've got to see, what is it you like about the anger? The same applies to any other unskillful state. What do you like about these things? And this is often an area where we have a lot of subterfuge in the mind, that many times we know something is unskillful, so we hide our reasons for going for it. And so as a meditator, you have to get the mind in really good, solid concentration. This is one of the reasons why the Buddha said, if you want discernment, you've got to get the mind settled. Not only so it gets still enough to watch itself, but also so it has a sense of well-being. So it can look at itself honestly and say, okay, this is really why I like to do this. And you don't feel threatened. You don't feel disturbed by seeing how unskillful you can be in your desires and what you like about your unskillful mind states. Then when you see what the allure is, and the Buddha says, compare that with the drawbacks. What are the drawbacks of this particular state of mind? And you can probably enumerate them very quickly. But the reason you haven't been, knowing the drawbacks hasn't had any impact, is you haven't been able to compare them with the genuine allure, why you like them. But it's when you really see why you like this thing, why you like this state of mind. You can compare it, then you begin to realize this is not worth it. You develop what the Buddha calls dispassion. And that's your escape. That's what frees you from the unskillful places that you've been holding on to. Because as you said, our suffering is basically what we hold on to. Now, he doesn't tell us to let go totally right from the very beginning. There are basically 4 ways that he said that we cling. One of them is to sensuality. In other words, the sensual pleasures we like, that we'd love to fantasize about, excuse me. And then there are views, or ideas of what the world is and how it works. And then there's our ideas of what the Buddha calls habits and practices. In other words, if you're going to get ahead and get what you want in the world, this is how you've got to do it. And finally, we hold on to our sense of ourself. Now, all these things are very much entwined. Your sense of yourself is very much entwined with how you've learned to find happiness in life. It is basically your strategy for finding happiness in life. And so your idea of how the world works, what pleasures are worth going for, and what you have to do to get those pleasures is going to be very much a part of yourself. And yet the Buddha said, these are the reasons why we suffer. It's counterintuitive, and that's one of the reasons why the Buddha's message often goes against the grain. But you look at it, look at yourself, and look at the word he uses for clinging. It's also the word for feeding. Look at the way you feed. The emotions you feed on, the ideas you feed on. And you begin to see, yes, you really do suffer around this need to feed. If you didn't have to feed, you'd be totally free. So again, the Buddha doesn't have you start out by starving yourself, but he says there are more skillful ways to cling. Of those 4 types of clinging, sensuality doesn't play a role in the path, but views do play a role in the path. The views of what's skillful, what's unskillful, the views about the Four Noble Truths. In other words, where suffering is in the clinging. What's it caused by? It's not caused by things outside as much as it's caused by things you're doing in terms of your cravings, your unskillful cravings. But there are also skillful desires. Those are part of the path to the end of suffering. Don't think they're all desires bad. The desire to be skillful, the desire to be harmless, the desire to act in wise ways. These are all things to be encouraged. That's the path to the end of suffering. And it will lead to ultimately to the actual end, whether you can dig up the unskillful cravings and be done with them. You can take the mind to a place where it no longer needs to feed. That's the right view the Buddha has you adopt, that you hold on to. Now you notice, even the view itself is something you eventually will have to let go of. It's something that's impermanent. But if you're going to hold on to impermanent things, it's a lot safer to hold on to impermanent things inside that lead you to act in skillful ways. Now hold on to so much of the things outside. This is all part of the right view that you will hold on to. As for habits and practices, the Buddha says good habits include following the precepts, not killing, not stealing, not having illicit sex, not lying, not taking intoxicants. These are good habits to develop. Because you find that your actions are harmless, you're not harming anybody else, you're not harming yourself. And the kind of actions that make it a lot easier to sit down and meditate. Sit down and close your eyes. And there's nothing you can criticize yourself for what you've done in the course of the day. You haven't harmed anybody. It's a lot easier to settle down. You get a sense of nourishment out of the concentration. Because that's another one of the practices that you hold on to. You're going to need food on the path. So the concentration is your food. There's a sense of ease, well-being, as we're working just now with the breath. You can breathe in a way that gives you a sense of ease. You can think to yourself in a way that allows the breath to be comfortable. And all this provides good food for the mind. It energizes the mind. It makes it a lot easier not to go hungering after your old pleasures that you need around skillful. And then finally, there's your sense of self. As the Buddha said, the self is its own mainstay. He never says there is no self. He simply says you have a sense of self or a perception of self that you create. You can also have a perception of not self. You've got to learn how to use them skillfully. For the path, you want a self that feels confident, competent too. You can do this. And a sense of self that feels responsible. I've got to take responsibility for my own actions. And realize that you will benefit from the path. Because our sense of self is usually composed of 2 types of self. There's a self that's the producer. In other words, it has the ability to find happiness. And then there's a self as the consumer that will be able to experience that happiness. We employ both of these senses of self as we go through the day many, many times, many different selves. That's why we have such a big committee in the mind. And oftentimes that's why there's so much problem in the committee. Different selves have different ideas about where you're going to go find your happiness. So the Buddha says you try to use that sense of a self as the producer. This producer can do this. As you reflect, other people can gain awakening. They're human beings. I'm a human being. They can do it. Why can't I? Even if awakening seems a bit far-fetched, you could say, well, other people can act in skillful ways. They're human beings. I'm a human being. They can do it. So can I. The Buddha encourages that kind of self-esteem, that sense of confidence in yourself as a producer. Then the self as the consumer, the Buddha says, if you ever feel tempted to give up on the path, remind yourself, you got onto the path because you loved yourself. You wanted to end the suffering you're causing to yourself. You no longer love yourself. You think about that for a while. So I should stick with the path. A second. It's a little too bright. Yeah. That's better. Okay. That's better. Okay. So that's the kind of self the Buddha has you hold on to as part of the path. Now, as for not self, you learn how to apply that selectively. Anything that would pull you off away from your precepts, you say, that's not going to be worth it. I don't have to identify with that desire. Things that would make you want to break your precepts, you say, they're not really mine. They're not going to be mine forever. And if I behave in an unskillful way to preserve these things, then they're going to leave me anyhow at some point. Then I'm going to be left with the karma. I'm left with the unskillful habits. The same with concentration. When you're focusing on the breath, you don't say, gee, my breath is not self. I'll just watch the concentration come and go. You really try to work at making it stay. And as for your distractions, well, those are the things you say, that's not self. It's not worth it. One contemplation I like is something's coming into the mind, interfering with my concentration. I ask myself, if this were a movie, would I pay to watch it? And usually the answer is no. The acting is horrible. The storyline is something I've known again and again and again. Why should I identify with it? Why should I go with it? That's when you apply not self. So basically the Buddha's teaching, okay, as part of the path, there are certain things you've got to cling to, but you learn to cling in a skillful way. So you can let go of all your unskillful clingings that have been causing you suffering. Because by holding on in these ways, that's when the mind gains its victory. That's when it learns how to overcome the unskillful members of the committee inside. And the skillful members get to take over. And so as you look at your life, you can begin to realize that the things that I would hold on to that would make it hard for me to have equanimity, make it hard for me to continue working on my mind, to continue doing skillful things, not only for myself, but for other people. I can let go of those because I've got better things to hold on to. So when the Buddha talks about equanimity, as I said, it's not the equanimity of defeatism, where you just give up. He's talking about the equanimity of a victor, someone who's going to win in the battle. Here the battle, of course, is over your greed, aversion, and delusion, over your unskillful states, unskillful mind states, over your unskillful ways of dealing with other people. He says you can train the good members of your committee so that they're strong and powerful. You either convert all the unskillful members or drive them out. So as you live in this world where there's a lot of change, the Buddha doesn't give you a blanket statement saying all change is good or all change is bad. He says there are certain changes that are really not important. You've got to learn how to let them go, not focus on them, and focus on the things where change is going to be important. It's either be change for the good or change for the bad. So you've got to watch out. You've got to be heedful. This is one of the reasons why the Buddha's last message to his followers was work with heedfulness. Because your actions really do make a difference. Where do your actions come from? They come from your state of mind. You really can, he said, work on your state of mind, so that you will create a life for yourself and for the people around you that's blameless, harmless, and leads to a happiness that's really solid inside. So watch out for those two types of change. This kind of change where the mind will change on itself, change direction. Remember to develop mindfulness to protect yourself from a change that goes in the wrong direction, and to keep it steered back in the right direction. And also keep a careful eye on the kind of change that can happen to places where you're basing your happiness. Ask yourself, is my happiness really safe? If I feel that it's threatened, I may start doing unskillful things. So they're going to harm me, harm the people around me. So I really got to be careful around that kind of change. Trying to find some other place to base my happiness that's more reliable. So I can rely on myself. That's the scariest thing in life, is when you realize things can change in society to such an extent that you may not be able to trust yourself to keep on practicing the Dharma. You have to remember that no matter how bad the change is, the Dharma still comes first. The truth of a good mind and a good heart comes first. There was once a king who came to see the Buddha in the middle of the day, King Vicinity. And the Buddha said, Your Majesty, what have you been doing today? And the king is remarkably frank. He said, the typical things of people who are obsessed with power. Can you imagine any of our politicians saying that now? But the Buddha says, suppose someone were to come from the east, a trustworthy person were to come from the east and say there's this enormous mountain moving in from the east, as tall as the sky, crushing all living beings in its path. Suppose there were another person to come from the south. The same news, there's another mountain coming in from the south, tall as the sky, crushing all living beings in its path. Another person coming from the west, another from the north, altogether 4 mountains moving in. With this horrible destruction of life and realizing how rare it is to get a human birth, what would you do? And the king says, what else can I do but calm my mind and practice the Dharma? Because after all, it's through the practice of the Dharma, it's through your actions. Your actions are your real treasure. So you want to make sure they are actions worth treasuring. And so the Buddha goes on to say, I tell you, aging, illness, and death are moving in, crushing all living beings in their path. What are you going to do? The king says, what else can I do but calm my mind and practice the Dharma? So whether there's a pandemic or no pandemic, the truth is always the same. The Dharma is always the same. Just a question of giving it priority, not forgetting our priorities. That's one of the duties of mindfulness. And using some discernment and asking ourselves where we're going to base our happiness in a way that it's not harmful to ourselves, not harmful to anybody else. So that's the kind of equanimity the Buddha recommends, the equanimity that allows you to be mindful and discerning. And finding a happiness really is satisfying, really is harmless. It provides a good example not only for yourself, but also for the people around you. So, Josh, that's all I've got to say tonight. I'm open for questions.
Okay. So if you'd like to raise your hand with the icon or just do it, on the screen, I'll scroll through and call on you. Huawei, is that how I say that? With the Y9 at the end? You can unmute yourself if you have the question. Huawei? There you go. Sorry, I messed up another name. Are you unmuted? It's the little blue icon in the corner. There you are. It looks like you're unmuted. We could hear you.
Hear the chickens.
Yes, the chickens from Wat Pabantad. I mean, Wat Pabantad.
Oh,
The characteristic of Wat Pabantad.
do you have a question?
No question? Okay, maybe we'll
Move on.
move on. Does anybody else have a question? I'm looking for hands. This might not be totally fair because I'm scrolling through a lot of pages.
Analia has her hand up.
Thanks, Rachel. Josh, am I okay to go?
Yep, you're good to go.
My question was, there was a book that two questions. One, if there's any books that you're editing or translating right now, and the other one is, I'm recently moved through the pandemic and no longer have access to my favorite book of yours, and I've been trying to download it, but apparently I don't know the name right. I thought it was called On the Path. It's got that orange cover with the artwork on it, and it's got like the best breakdown with both the suttas and your explanation of the Eightfold Path. Do you remember what you titled that book? Maybe it's a silly question because of course you do.
It is On the Path, yeah.
Oh, so is that maybe not available on PDF online and only available on print?
Ooh, I'll have to look at the website. I'm not a frequenter of the website.
Yeah, and I just had the book which you gifted me. I don't know, when it was fresh off the press, and I've literally traveled the world with it. But with it being displaced with a pandemic, I no longer have it, and I keep like reaching for it as that refuge. So thank you for writing it, first of all, and second, if I could get another copy,
Sure.
if you could look.
Just send a letter to the monastery, and we'll have you a copy.
Perfect. So it is On the Path.
It is On the Path, yeah.
And are you working on any translations currently?
I did a retreat in Brazil just before the pandemic, and I'm working on the transcriptions from the retreats. It's on the topic of the 10 perfections.
Oh, beautiful. I look forward to that. Thank you. Thank you for all you do and all the teaching and all of the work that you do for us. I deeply appreciate it.
Okay, Julia Uden has a question.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah.
I'm trying to periodically follow the 8 precepts, and I'm having trouble with one of them, which is not listening to music.
Mhm.
And this is because I have a daughter who we are accustomed to play music to. And she always wants to listen to music, and then I feel like I can't, take that away from her suddenly once a day,
Okay.
1 day a week.
Okay, well, observe the 7 precepts.
Yes, okay. Better with 7 than 5.
None. 5, yeah.
than none. Okay, so I just do as many as possible, but more like the principle behind this. Then is there something about like listening to music that people that you live with play?
Okay, if they're gonna play it, that's up to them. You don't tell them not to play the music. It's just that you don't go out of your way to listen. That's all. If you're observing the precept.
Okay.
Would anybody else like to ask a question?
There's a hand.
Hannah.
Hi. Thank you, number one. And number two, I have a historical question I'm hoping you can answer.
Okay.
At the time of the Buddha, there was also Mahavira, I believe his name was, and it was of another sect with very similar, and I forget their name right now, very similar beliefs and practices. Can you and do you know of why, first of all, where Buddhism sprang from, like out of Brahmanism, but also why this other sect, whose leader was called Mahavira, why that was developed as well. And I believe in some of the suttas, he talks about hosting some of the other monks from that other sect. But he had some, I don't know what, some opposition to them. I don't know if that's the right word, opposition to some of their beliefs. Do you know what I know the sect I'm talking about?
Yeah.
I believe that in one section of the world, they're called the Parsis.
No,
And
it's a group called the Jains.
yes, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes.
In the time of the Buddha, they were called the Nigantas.
Okay.
And both Buddhism and the Nigantas came out of what was called the Samana tradition in India, which was, you had Brahmanism, which was the dominant of the Aryan, the dominant religion of the Aryans.
Yes,
And
yes.
apparently there were other religions that were native to India prior to the Aryan invasion. And those traditions continued basically in what are called the Samana traditions. You had many different
Okay.
ones. And the Jains were one, but there's a whole series of others that developed out of that side of the
Okay.
Indian tradition. The main difference between the Jains and the Buddhists was on the issue of karma. Now, on the one hand, the Jains said, okay, your karma does determine your future, but they said it's once you've done something in the past, your present moment is totally determined by the future. Whereas in Buddhism, your present moment is partially determined by your present moment is totally determined by the past. Whereas in Buddhism, your present moment is partly determined by the past and also partly determined by free choices you have to make in the present moment.
Okay.
And it's one of the few cases where the Buddha actually goes out and finds somebody and to argue with them. He goes to the Jains and he says, do you really believe that everything you experience is based on the past? And they say, yes. And apparently they were doing austerities. And he said, well, these austerities that you do when you have pains from the austerities, what happens to the pains when you stop the austerities? And they said, well, the pains go away. He said, well, doesn't that show that the pain is coming from what you're doing right now rather than what came from the past? For the Buddha, it was a big issue because if everything you experience right now is totally determined by the past, you have no choices.
Mm-hmm.
And for him, the principle of having freedom of choice in the present moment to choose what is skillful was probably the most important principle of his teaching.
And it's actually the most, it frees you at that point.
Right, right.
Yes, once you come to that understanding. Okay, thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, I'll go to Miriam. Miriam, you there?
Hi. Yeah, I am here. I'm trying to unmute myself and start my video.
You are
Hi,
unmuted.
Ajaan. Good to see you. I am unmuted. That was a wonderful talk. Thank you so very much. I wanted to know when you mentioned that this person is human, they've accomplished this, I am human, I can do this as well. I wanted to know if the past karma plays any role in this lifetime to know how far can you achieve in your spiritual path.
You never know until you try. In other words, you give it your best.
Okay.
And if it
And
so
if
happens,
you're
and if it so happens there's something in your past karma that says, well, not this lifetime, but you keep at it, and that'll give you the momentum for the next lifetime.
okay, that's good. Thank you, Ajaan.
Okay, Asher.
Thanks, Josh. And thank you, Ajaan.
Mhm.
Two questions, and the first has to do with, it's very common for contemporary teachers to speak about meeting our own internal pain or the afflictions with sort of the energy of the Brahmaviharas, specifically metta and karuna. And in looking in the suttas, the Buddha doesn't really seem to talk about meeting our anger, for instance, with kindness or compassion directly. But I have found this to be, in some cases, a pretty effective, skillful means for not falling sway to the anger, not allowing it to take over the mind, and even doing maybe some internal softening so that I can get some distance from it. And I'm wondering, in part, is there anywhere in the suttas where kind of the skillful means framework is applied to the Brahmaviharas pointed inward, not just for myself and then outward, but actually for the afflictions or for the pain in the body and the mind?
Okay, I haven't seen anything in the canon that says that, but there's nothing really wrong with that. You have to, if you're going to be pulling yourself out of the power of a negative emotion, you've got to use whatever works.
Thank you.
We're not ironclad bound to do only what the Buddha said. In the forest tradition, they might make the point that the Dharma is like a kind of a basic tonic for getting rid of your illnesses. And if you have a specific illness that's not covered by the tonic, well, you can add a few more ingredients. And if it works, it works. Then it's Dharma.
It's very empowering. Thank you. The other question was, I think you mentioned anicca or impermanence, and the way that certain things being impermanent may be favorable and other things not so much, that impermanence isn't necessarily good or bad. But I know that so often in the suttas, the formula, when the Buddha asks these sort of canned questions about the 3 marks of existence, he says, bhikkhus, is form permanent or impermanent? And they say impermanent, and he says, what is impermanent, suffering or happiness? And they're expected to answer suffering. And so there seems to be a pretty strong connection between anicca and dukkha, and I was just wondering if you could speak to that related to what you just said.
Yeah, well, when the Buddha is giving that questionnaire, he's talking to people who are on the verge of becoming arahants, when they've developed the path to the point where that's all they have to do now is let go, and they'll be free. Up until that point, though, you have to learn how to be selective in where you're going to be focusing on, and what's impermanent, and what's bad because it's impermanent, what's impermanent is good because it's impermanent. You've got something unskillful coming up in the mind. It's a good thing that it's impermanent. You're going to be able to get past it. And that's why he says, you focus on the passing away of unskillful states. That's an important part of getting past them. So, but when you're applying the blanket perception of impermanence, stress, and not self to everything, that's at the end of the path.
Thank you.
Okay, before I pick somebody, I have a YouTube question from Krishna. Is trying to get liberation similar to trying to go out of existence in a permanent way instead of temporary death and rebirth? ? Why do we want to pursue liberation? I am new to this, finding it difficult to follow a few precepts, hence the question.
Okay, the purpose is not to go out of existence. The purpose is to free the mind from its suffering. Now, when the Buddha was asked, well, if someone who has become awakened, do they exist? Do they not exist? Both, neither. He refused to answer. He says, you're placing a limitation on what is unlimited freedom. So that's the basic desire that motivates the path, is to find freedom from suffering. And also freedom from harming other people, harming ourselves, harming others. But the state of awakening, there is a consciousness in awakening, but it's not the same consciousness as the consciousness of the senses. The Buddha says that much. He doesn't like to talk about it too much, because if you have preconceived notions about it, he says those notions can get in the way. But he says, as long as you see that it will be the ultimate happiness when you find it, you're not going to regret it when you get it. That's the right view that's going to keep you on the path. So if it requires observing the precepts, put up with the difficulty, and it's going to be worth it.
Okay. Next question is Todd.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
I wanted to thank you for putting your Dharma talks on YouTube. I really enjoyed listening to your Dharma talks on YouTube. It's been very helpful to have them handy. I wanted to ask two questions. One of them is about, with the coronavirus and hearing about the medical interventions that they're doing at people's deaths, it kind of jarred me into thinking about my death. and I've been talking to my sons and trying to help them to understand what I want. And the idea of having things shoved down your throat and having drugs given to you so you're not conscious while you're trying to die kind of scares me. So I'm just wondering, does it seem reasonable to say, don't do those things to me if I'm gonna die or I'm dying?
Yeah, that's perfectly reasonable.
Okay, great. That's what I was thinking about. I'm having a hard time getting my sons to understand my ideas, and I've also had problems with that same idea when talking to doctors and trying to get them to understand that their concern for my pain is not. I wish they wouldn't have as much concern as they do for my pain, as they seem to have. The other question I had was, I'm wondering about, I feel like I've been stuck in my meditation for a long time, like a really long time. And I'm wondering if it's maybe I'm making a mistake trying to do this by myself too much. And I'm wondering if it's just, I know I've heard some of your talks about the mind, training the mind, and I'm just wondering if by being stuck, if I just need to seek more help, maybe that's, I know the Buddha did it on his own, but I'm not the Buddha. And
yeah, I mean, if there's help available, take advantage of it.
Okay. I mean, it's been many years. I was progressing quite well, I felt like, and then I had an experience where I reached a point where I felt like I didn't have a body, and I stopped breathing, and I felt like this stillness, but I didn't feel, but I got frightened. I like had this, and then I started breathing. And I feel like ever since then in my meditation, I've been afraid to go back or something like this. So I'm not even sure what question I want to ask you, except to relate that I had that experience.
How to experience that again without fear? Yeah. And part of it is to realize if the body really needs to breathe, it will breathe. I mean, there are states of concentration where the breath stops, and it happens because the mind is so still. And I guess in terms of modern physiology, you would say that's because there's so little oxygen being used that the oxygen that's absorbed by the skin is enough to keep you going. So you can be confident that, if you have the breath energy in the body, once it's full, there's a sense that, okay, the energy in the body is the real breath. And once the body is full and you feel no need to breathe, you can just stay there. And if the body has to breathe, it will start breathing. This is not going to kill you.
Okay. All right, thank you.
So just keep reminding yourself, okay, you're not going to die. I don't know anybody who's died in the fourth jhana that way.
I had a discussion with my uncle, who was a doctor, about that experience, and he didn't believe me. He didn't believe that I stopped breathing.
Yeah.
I couldn't convince him that. So it's kind of funny, that conversations with doctors. All right, thank you.
Julia, you have another question?
Yes, so this is about the factors for jhana, so singleness of preoccupation. And I'm glad that you mentioned this in this talk as well, so that we shouldn't focus on the pleasure. And because this is a little bit difficult for me, because the breath is not just breathing, it's also the breath energies in the body. And for me, this is, I experience this as almost two different things. Sometimes they go together, sometimes they are two different things. And then, yeah, that sort of doesn't harmonize with the idea of singleness of preoccupations, because now I'm focusing on two things. So for instance, I'm focusing on a spot in the body, but there might be like this really pleasurable breath energy in the hands. And then I might want to go there, but then that seems dangerous from the point of view of not focusing on the pleasure.
Okay, as long as you see that the pleasure is coming from the breath, it's okay.
Mm.
It's when you forget about breath. It's I'm just going to wallow in the pleasure, forget about the breath. That's when you have a problem.
Okay.
You realize that this sensation of pleasure in the hands is related to the way the breath energy is flowing. Then it's perfectly fine.
Yeah, okay. So I guess then that perhaps this becomes more of an issue when the pleasure becomes stronger or so, because to me it seems like this is not like really a likely thing to happen, that I would wallow in the pleasure. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
Sure.
I have another written question. With shelter in place, the amount of chores I have to do is tremendously increased, and I feel tired a lot. When the body is tired, it is very hard for me to get a hold of my mind, and sometimes I blow up. How do I deal with anger when I am tired?
Okay, just tell yourself, as long as I'm angry, I've got to not say anything based on the anger. And if you feel like you're going to explode, think you're going to get the breath energy just flows out through the pores of the skin, flows out through wherever the tension builds up. Think of it as an excess of unpleasant breath energy, and just think of it flowing out the palms of your hands, the soles of your feet. See if that helps take some of the pressure away. And then if you can, try to find some time to take out some time to just be with your breath. Meditate a little bit every day. So you get a little bit more energy that comes from getting the mind to settle down. So it's not feeling so oppressed by the circumstances around you.
Next question is Marin O.
Hi, can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Hi, nice to see you, Ajaan. Thank you for this talk, and thank you for both to us online.
Your brother's
I
sitting
have
here.
a question about, you mentioned the allure about certain perceptions and feelings. Am I still here?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah, I wanted to ask about the allure. So when I have these perceptions and feelings I come back to again and again, how do I discover what's the allure, what I like about it?
Okay, tell yourself, I'm not going to go there, and then see what part of the mind says, no, wait a minute, please, can we go?
Okay. So I just have to pay really close attention.
Really pay attention, and it'll come very quickly, and then it will disappear. So you've got to be very quick.
All right. Thank you.
All right, next I have Samuel.
Hello?
No.
Can you hear me?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'd like to express my gratitude for your teachings, Ajaan Geoff, and your writings, and just making them very accessible. It's just been a tremendous gift for me. So I just want to express my gratitude first. Thank you. I have a few questions, and I don't want to be too greedy, but I do have I have a few questions I would like to ask. I guess my first question is, I'm going to be ordaining as an anagarika next week. and it's to be a temporary, like a 3-month ordination period. And I'm wondering if you have any advice about going into that, like what I should have in the forefront of my mind, or yeah, any advice.
Okay, your top priority should be, this should give you a good opportunity for meditation. You should make that your top priority. You don't have to spend so much time reading, and spend whatever, if you have a choice between time spent reading and time spent meditating, I'd say go for the meditation.
That's helpful. That was also another question I had. I've been living with a monastic community for the past 6 months, and yeah, I'll be continuing on with them. And I've been finding reading the suttas, the Majjhima Nikaya, really deepening my practice and understanding a relationship to the teachings. So yeah, that was one of my questions when I have a 2-week retreat period, whether to continue with studying or to put that aside and fully focus on meditation.
I'd say read maybe 1 sutta a day and really think about it.
Okay.
Limited to that.
Okay, I have a, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I have one more question. My father is in his mid-70s and is starting to really consider his death and starting to have some questions about what is the purpose of life beyond paying off his debt and being materially successful. And he doesn't have he's not particularly aligned to any spirituality, and not so comfortable talking from his heart. And just wondering if you have any advice for giving him support.
Okay, well, I'd say try to ask him what qualities of mind that he finds that he develops that he feels most satisfying, and to focus on developing more of those. I mean, generosity, virtue, anything that would be in the 10 perfections. Look in that list and that's the other thing that you can encourage him in. That would probably be for his best for his well-being.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I have one more YouTube question. Mindfulness in the Pali Canon is connected with keeping something in mind and remembering, but in contemporary Buddhism, it's often bare awareness or non-reacting awareness. What are the historical grounds for this? Is it in the commentaries or is it just a modern approach?
It's more a modern approach. I have a student who's doing a PhD thesis right now on the history of mindfulness, and it's apparently it's an approach that got started in the 19th century. And as for the details, wait till the it's a long story.
David V.
Hello. Yeah, I'm also feeling quite grateful. Thank you for the encouragement and inspiration with the teachings this evening. I have a question about interpersonal anxiety. I've been practicing for about 20 years and have a daily meditation practice. And throughout my life, on and off, and again, like the last 6 months, I've seen this kind of anxiety arise that's more, it manifests more around men. And I've worked with a few therapists who believe it's something from like a very early childhood trauma, but I don't really I don't really see the perceptions, and meditation went up, but I don't see during some of the social interactions, the relationships, that anxiety rises. And yeah, I'm just kind of really open to advice about practices that you think can help alleviate and kind of cut through this.
Okay, one thing that's helpful is if you can gain a sense of the breath energy filling your body and your awareness filling your body, so that you have a sense that, okay, they cannot invade my space. And then spread lots of goodwill to whoever it is. Those are the two things that give you a greater sense of safety and protection.
So cultivating, just cultivating metta, and then during social interaction, just feeling out my body and feeling the breath.
Right. So that you feel more grounded.
Right. During the social interactions, I'm quite aware. I do try to maintain a lot of awareness of my body, my whole body, but I still find that it's a bit of a kind of a flooding. So maybe it's cultivating more kind of goodness,
right,
towards those people, even before and after. That whole will permeate.
Although I'll tell you one other trick. When I was a young monk and I had to give a Dharma talk, and Ajaan Fuang said, imagine that you have a sword in your hand, and if anybody doesn't like your talk, you can cut off their heads.
All right, I'll try that one also and see how that works.
In other words, you're in a position of power. Don't give them the power.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I have a question from Jason. He says, "Hi, Venerable. Can you please explain a sutta, AN 613, particularly on the paragraph related to signless? It's one of the 6 properties as means of escape. What does it mean for consciousness to follow drift of signs?"
Okay, the Buddha is talking about a very elevated level of concentration there. What they call the signless concentration is when the mind is centered, but doesn't have a particular theme that it could say this is the theme of my concentration. When you follow the drift of signs, in other words, you follow the breath as your sign, then the mind is going to follow along with the breath. If you're following, say, metta as a sign or a theme of your concentration, you follow along with the metta. But this is a concentration where you cannot identify any particular object that you're focused on, but the mind is centered and still and alert.
Okay, my next Tony Tran.
Yes. Hi, Ajaan. I'm Tony. I'm calling from Vietnam. Yes, I also want to take this opportunity to thank you for teaching the Dhamma. My questions need a little bit of really quick introductions. So I think that one of my favorite teaching of yours is freedom of choice, and also when you often mention there's one part you mentioned about the basic dynamic of desires are all about in the 4 noble truths, and I think that the strategies, and one of the strategy we can develop is develop the Eightfold Path, even specifically around the breath. So in terms of my practice, I think that my question is, I'm getting more and more sensitive to all my senses. Even tasting simple food can become pleasures. So I'm not sure how can we not like afraid of it or fear of it, but not how can we tackle it so that I'm not indulging in those simple pleasures. And also because at the same time, when I'm more sensitive to my body sensation, even a tiny little discomfort, I'm able to recognize. So will the body breathings eventually help with that? Or I have to cultivate like metta or goodwill even more to counteract with those little discomfort or sensation in the body.
Okay, focusing on the breath should give you either a tool with which you can work with the discomforts, or if breathing through them doesn't make them go away, the fact that you're focused on the breath gives you a better place to put your mind so that the discomfort doesn't have such a huge impact on it. As for the taste of the food, and people make food to make it taste delicious.
Well, that's the purpose.
Yeah, you can't stop them from that. You just say, okay, notice that, okay, the food tastes good, but at the same time, how much should I eat? Focus on how the body's telling you when you've had enough, and stop then. And then you're okay. I mean, you can't deny the fact that it tastes good. But just don't make that your primary focus.
Just think of it as the food to feed the body.
Right.
Thank you, Ajaan.
Okay, I have one more written question and then about 3 more, and maybe we'll cut it off there.
Fine.
The mind is interested in cessation at the moment, breath, thoughts, and also in emptiness. Can Ajaan speak more on this? Thank you.
Okay, well, focus on the breath, because you're going to be learning a lot about how the mind fashions its experience by the way it relates to the breath, and by how it talks to itself about the breath and the perceptions you have around the breath. The emptiness is going to come on its own once you understand these things. So you have to do the work of understanding the processes of fabrication first, and then it will incline more skillfully towards the freedom of the cessation of fabrications. In other words, you can't get them to stop until you've learned how to do them skillfully.
Okay. Leong from Singapore. Are you still there, Leong?
Good evening, Tan Ajaan.
Good evening.
Yeah, I have 2 questions from Singapore. Regarding the Satipatthana on the mindfulness of mind and mindfulness of Dharma, do we practice in stages or start with breathing and then come to these 2, or there is also some scenario where we think of or adopt a certain object and practice mindfulness accordingly?
Okay, usually the Buddha says you start with the breath, and then you will notice, and then it's kind of like lassoing the mind to be in the present moment, because you know when you're with the breath, you're in the present moment. You can't be watching a past breath or a future breath. And then you start observing the mind as it relates to the breath.
Okay.
And then mental qualities as they relate to the breath.
Okay, thank you. I have a second question, is that very often you mentioned about the breath energy. Is this similar to the qi when they mention in qigong, or the panna in?
Yes, it's the same thing.
Thank you. Thank you, Ajaan.
This is the last YouTube question from Matt. What is a favorite or most interesting story of yours, seeing a student or someone finding the path and transforming as a result?
I had a student in Singapore who, after he left the army, decided he wanted to become a stevedore because he would be able to smuggle. And then he found the Dharma because he was too sick, because he was too sick. And now he's a monk. So you never know.
Never know. Back to that karma question.
Right, right.
Julia, did you have another question?
Yes, now on the precept of killing. So we're not supposed to tell other people to kill, but what about animals? We can't talk with them anyway. So if you, for instance, buy a cat with the intention that it would kill mice, is that against the killing precept?
Apparently not.
Okay, that's interesting. Thank you.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And Samuel, you'll be the last question tonight, if you're still there.
Yep. I have a question concerning self-led retreats. So I've done 8 or 9 Goenka, 10-day Goenka retreats. And this past year, I've been opening my mind to other approaches. So I've been practicing a lot with your guided meditations. I did a 14-week self-led retreat trying out Paul Ock's method of Anapana. And kind of, I'm wondering now, I'm going to have a 14-day retreat coming up in a month or two, and I don't know how I want to approach it in terms of picking one method and just working with that to see what kind of effects it gives, or to be more responsive and creative as I'm going about each sit, and also how many hours a day, because I usually try to sit 10 hours a day, 8 to 10 hours, and do walking meditation in between, no reading, just meditation like that. And wondering if you would recommend doing something differently, like also doing some work, or doing yoga or something like that.
Okay. Cleaning up the space where you are is an important part of the meditation. So make sure every day you spend a little time cleaning things up around. As far as the technique, the breath is probably the safest technique you can use if you're meditating on your own. So don't go too far from that. You can try other things. John Lee makes a comparison. He says the breath is like your home base, and other meditation techniques you can use now to go out foraging. When lust comes up or anger comes up, you use a meditation that's appropriate for those things. But then you return to the breath as your home base. And if you want to do yoga, you don't want to do yoga or qigong, that's perfectly fine.
A challenge that came up for me, the last retreat I did, which was self-led, I found sometimes my mind really, really ran, and it was very difficult to hold it back or maintain a longer continuity of one-pointedness. And I've had deep concentration in previous retreats, and I think I got a bit frustrated. And wondering if that comes up again, how to deal with that.
Okay,
if
just
the mind is really
think of it as a storm going through, and you just find one little corner of your mind. So I'm going to hold on to this corner of the mind and let the storm pass until you figure out what triggered it. Because sometimes that will be the reaction if you're doing nothing but concentration practice. So for long periods of time, the mind will rebel. And so what we usually do in the forest tradition is say, okay, go up and climb that mountain over there. Get rid of some of the excess energy. If you don't have a mountain to climb, okay, just say I'll hold on to one little corner here, and then spend some time being meticulously very, very clean about your room. give yourself something to focus on outside of the mind for a while and then come back.
Thank you. That's helpful.
Okay, well, thank you for your attention. And Josh, thank you for hosting this.
And Geoff, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to give us that Dharma talk, pep talk, if you will. It felt like a pep talk, and it was very topical of what's going on with many of us. Really appreciate you doing this for us.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. Okay. You all be well.
All right.
Thank you, Ajaan.